The garden fell silent. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. A deafening roar cut through the string quartet's melody as a helicopter descended from the evening sky, its blade slicing the air like thunder. Chad Henderson's jaw dropped. Vanessa Brooks stumbled backward, her stilettos sinking into the manicured lawn. The aircraft touched down on the country club's pristine garden, right in the center of their 15-year reunion. They had sent that invitation as a joke, a cruel reminder to the scholarship orphan who once scrubbed cafeteria floors for lunch money. Class loser. Scholarship trash. 15 years of those words, and they thought he'd crawl back begging for acceptance. The helicopter door swung open. A polished leather shoe touched the grass, and the man who stepped out wore a suit worth more than Chad's entire car. But here's what none of them knew. Derek Callahan hadn't come to prove anything. He came for something they could never understand. And what happened next would change everything. 3 weeks earlier, Derek Callahan sat at his kitchen table in a penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the marble countertops, casting warm light on the stack of mail his assistant had left the night before. His daughter Penny perched on the stool beside him, her 10-year-old legs swinging as she devoured a bowl of cereal. She had her mother's eyes, bright, curious, always searching for something interesting in the mundane. Derek's hands moved through the envelopes mechanically. Bills he no longer worried about. Invitations to galas he rarely attended. And then his fingers stopped on a cream-colored envelope with elegant gold lettering. Westbrook Academy. The name alone sent a chill through his chest, like someone had cracked open a window to let in a winter draft. He turned the envelope over, noting the familiar crest embossed on the seal. A lion and an eagle, symbols of strength and prestige. Symbols that had meant nothing to the boy who arrived at those gates with holes in his shoes and hunger in his stomach. Derek slid his finger under the flap and pulled out the invitation. The paper felt expensive, heavy with the weight of old money and older traditions. Westbrook Academy Class of 2010, 15-year reunion, the calligraphy announced. Join us for an evening of memories, reconnection, and celebration at the Westbrook Country Club. Derek read the words twice, then set the invitation down as if it might burn his fingers. Penny looked up from her cereal, a drop of milk clinging to her chin. She wiped it away and tilted her head, studying her father's expression with that uncanny perception children possess. "What's wrong, Dad?" Her voice was soft, concerned. Derek forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He picked up the invitation again, holding it between his thumb and forefinger, like evidence at a crime scene. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just an old memory, knocking on the door." Penny set down her spoon and leaned closer, reading the invitation upside down with the determination of a detective. "A reunion? That sounds fun. Are you going to go?" Derek laughed, but the sound came out hollow, echoing off the high ceilings of their home. He thought about the hallways of Westbrook Academy, the polished floors that reflected the faces of students who belonged there. And then there was him, the scholarship kid, the orphan from the group home, the boy who wore secondhand uniforms and carried his books in a torn backpack. He remembered the whispers that followed him like shadows, the laughter that cut deeper than any blade. "I don't think so, Penny." He tucked the invitation under the stack of other mail, burying it beneath utility bills and charity requests. Some doors are better left closed. But Penny wasn't satisfied. She had inherited more than her mother's eyes. She had Derek's stubbornness, that refusal to accept easy answers. She pulled the invitation back out and studied it with the seriousness of a scholar examining an ancient text. "Westbrook Academy. Is that where you went to high school?" Derek nodded, his jaw tightening. It was a long time ago. Penny traced the gold lettering with her fingertip, her brow furrowed in thought. You never talk about high school, Dad. Not ever. When I ask about your old friends, you change the subject. When I ask about prom or football games or any of that stuff, you just get quiet. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for answers he wasn't sure he could give. What happened there? Derek took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 15 years pressing against his chest. He had built walls around those memories, thick walls reinforced with success and time and the deliberate act of forgetting. But Penny had a way of finding cracks in every wall he built. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, buying himself a moment to gather his thoughts. Westbrook Academy was a school for wealthy families, he began, his voice measured and careful. Old money, trust funds, country club memberships passed down through generations. And then there was me, an orphan from St. Christopher's group home who happened to test well on a standardized exam. He paused, remembering the letter that had arrived at the group home when he was 14, a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious preparatory schools in the state. The other kids had gathered around him, their eyes wide with wonder and envy. The house mother had cried, telling him this was his ticket out, his chance at a real future. I thought it was a miracle, Derek continued, his gaze drifting to the window, to the skyline that represented everything he had built since those dark days. But when I got there, I realized that scholarships don't buy acceptance. They don't erase where you come from or make people forget that you're different. Penny listened in silence, her cereal forgotten, her attention fixed entirely on her father. There was a group of students who made it their mission to remind me every single day that I didn't belong. Chad Henderson was their leader. His father owned half the commercial real estate in the city. And Vanessa Brooks, she was like a queen, beautiful and cruel, with a laugh that could make you feel 2 inches tall. Derek's hands curled into fists on the table, the old anger stirring beneath the surface. They called me scholarship trash. They shoved me into lockers, stole my homework, spread rumors that I was a thief because where else would an orphan get money for lunch? He looked at Penny, seeing the shock in her eyes, the disbelief that anyone could be so cruel. The worst part wasn't the physical stuff. It was the way they made me feel invisible, like I was less than human, just because I didn't have parents who could write checks with lots of zeros. Penny reached across the table and took her father's hand, her small fingers wrapping around his with surprising strength. "That's awful, Dad. I'm so sorry." Derek smiled, a real smile this time, warmed by his daughter's compassion. "It was a long time ago, sweetheart. I survived. I graduated, and I made a promise to myself that I would never let anyone make me feel that way again." He squeezed her hand gently. "That promise is part of why we live in this apartment, why I built my company, why I work so hard. I wanted to prove—" He stopped, catching himself. Penny tilted her head. "Prove what?" Derek considered the question, turning it over in his mind like a stone. "I wanted to prove that where you come from doesn't determine where you end up. That hard work and determination can overcome any obstacle. That the kid from the group home could become someone." Penny nodded slowly, processing his words. Then she picked up the invitation again, studying it with renewed interest. "So, these people who were mean to you, they're the ones throwing this party?" Derek nodded. "Probably. Chad and Vanessa were always at the center of everything social at Westbrook." Penny's eyes narrowed, and Derek recognized that expression. It was the same look she got when solving a difficult math problem or plotting revenge against a classmate who had wronged her. "Then you should go." Derek blinked, surprised. "What?" "Penny, I just told you." She held up the invitation, shaking it gently for emphasis. You should go, Dad. Not to prove anything to them, but to prove something to yourself. Derek opened his mouth to argue, but Penny continued, her words tumbling out with the passionate certainty of youth. You always tell me to face my fears. You always say that running away from something gives it power over you. But you've been running from this for 15 years. She set the invitation down in front of him, smoothing out the creases with her palm. Maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to show them, and yourself, who you really are. Derek stared at his daughter, this small person who contained multitudes, who could cut through his defenses with a single observation. She was right, of course. She usually was. But the thought of walking back into that world, of facing Chad and Vanessa and all the ghosts of his past, it made his stomach turn with a mixture of dread and something else. Something that felt almost like hope. The next morning, Derek sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Callahan Capitol building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a concrete jungle he had learned to navigate and eventually conquer. His desk was clean, organized, a reflection of the discipline that had carried him from the group home to the corner office. Wesley Porter, his business partner and oldest friend, knocked on the glass door before entering. They had met during freshman orientation at Columbia University, two scholarship kids who recognized something familiar in each other's eyes. While Derek came from the group home, Wesley had grown up in a single-wide trailer in rural Pennsylvania, the first in his family to graduate high school, let alone attend an Ivy League university. They had built Callahan Capital together, brick by brick, deal by deal, until it became one of the most respected investment firms on Wall Street. Wesley dropped into the chair across from Derek's desk, his lanky frame folding like a carpenter's ruler. You look like someone canceled your birthday, he observed, his accent still carrying traces of his Appalachian roots, despite years of board meetings and client dinners. Derek tossed the Westbrook invitation across the desk. Wesley picked it up, read it, and let out a low whistle. Well, well, well. The prodigal orphan returns. Derek shot him a look. Not helpful. Wesley grinned, unrepentant. I'm just saying, this is kind of poetic, isn't it? The kid they called scholarship trash, showing up to the reunion as a multi-millionaire? He leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. Please tell me you're going. Please tell me you're going to walk in there and watch their faces melt like ice cream on a hot sidewalk. Derek shook his head. I wasn't planning on it, but Penny thinks I should. Wesley's eyebrows rose. The wise Miss Penny has spoken? Then it's settled. You're going. He set the invitation down and leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Look, I know what that place did to you. You told me the stories, the lockers, the names, the way they made you feel like nothing. And I know you've spent 15 years trying to prove them wrong. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But here's the thing, Derek. You've already proved them wrong. You proved them wrong when you graduated valedictorian from Columbia. You proved them wrong when you closed your first $100 million deal. You proved them wrong every single day when you wake up in that penthouse and look out at a city that once seemed impossible to conquer. Wesley stood, walking to the window and gazing out at the skyline. The question isn't whether you've proved them wrong. The question is whether you've proved it to yourself. Derek sat in silence, letting his friend's words sink in. Wesley had a way of cutting through the noise, of finding the truth buried beneath layers of rationalization and fear. What if I go and nothing's changed? Derek asked quietly. What if I see them and I'm 14 again, wearing secondhand clothes and trying not to cry in the bathroom between classes? Wesley turned from the window, his expression soft with understanding. Then you'll know that you still have work to do. Not on your business or your bank account, but on yourself. He walked back to the desk and picked up the invitation one more time. Go to the reunion, Derek. Not for them. For you. For that scared kid who deserves to see how far he's come. Derek took the invitation back, running his thumb over the embossed crest. The lion and the eagle. Strength and prestige. Symbols that had once represented everything he wasn't allowed to have. But now they were just ink on paper, relics of a world he had outgrown. Fine, he said finally. I'll go. Wesley's face split into a wide grin. That's my boy. And hey, if you really want to make an entrance, I know a guy who rents helicopters. Derek laughed, shaking his head. That's ridiculous. But even as he said it, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Maybe ridiculous was exactly what this situation called for. The day of the reunion arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and expensive perfume. The Westbrook Country Club sprawled across 50 acres of manicured grounds, its Georgian architecture rising like a monument to old money and older traditions. Derek had arranged for the helicopter to land at precisely 7:15, 15 minutes after the reunion officially began. He wanted to make sure everyone was already there, champagne in hand, ready to witness his arrival. He wasn't proud of the pettiness, but he wasn't above it either. As the helicopter descended toward the country club, Derek looked out the window at the gathering below. White tents dotted the lawn, fairy lights twinkled in the early evening, and clusters of well-dressed guests milled about, with the practiced ease of people who had spent their entire lives at parties exactly like this one. His heart hammered against his ribs, a rhythm of anticipation and old fear. But then he thought of Penny, of her fierce belief in him, of the way she had hugged him before he left, and whispered, "Show them who you are, Dad." He straightened his tie, a deep navy silk that cost more than his entire wardrobe in high school, and took a steadying breath. The helicopter touched down on the pristine lawn, and Derek could see the guests scattering, champagne sloshing, faces turning toward the unexpected arrival. He waited a moment, letting the anticipation build, before nodding to the pilot. The door swung open. He stepped out onto the grass, his Italian leather shoes sinking slightly into the manicured turf. The wind from the rotors tousled his hair, but he didn't bother to smooth it down. He was done trying to look perfect for these people. The first face he recognized was Chad Henderson. 15 years had not been entirely kind to Chad. His hairline had retreated, his middle had expanded, and the confident swagger of youth had been replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. He stood near the bar, a drink clutched in his hand, his mouth hanging open in undisguised shock. Derek allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction before turning his attention to the crowd. Vanessa Brooks stood a few feet away, frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights. She was still beautiful. Time had softened her sharp features, added a few lines around her eyes that spoke of laughter and worry in equal measure. But there was something else in her expression, something Derek hadn't expected to see. It looked almost like shame. The string quartet had stopped playing. The chatter had died to whispers. Every eye in the garden was fixed on Derek Callahan, the scholarship orphan, who had just landed a helicopter on their precious lawn. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the crowd, each step deliberate, unhurried. Chad found his voice first. "Derek? Derek Callahan." He laughed, but it came out strangled, uncertain. "What the hell, man? Is this some kind of joke?" Derek stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the sweat beading on Chad's forehead. "Hello, Chad. It's been a while." Chad's eyes traveled from Derek's tailored suit to his Rolex, from his confident posture to the helicopter still idling on the lawn behind him. The wheels were clearly turning in his head, trying to reconcile the boy he remembered with the man standing before him. "I don't understand," Chad stammered. "Last I heard, we thought—" Derek raised an eyebrow. "You thought what? That I'd show up in a rusty pickup truck, begging for scraps from your table?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones appeared in hands, fingers flying across screens, searching for information that would explain this impossible transformation. Derek knew what they would find. Callahan Capital, one of the most successful investment firms in New York, featured in Forbes, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal. Clients that included Fortune 500 companies, sovereign wealth funds, and celebrities whose names were known around the world. He hadn't come here to brag about any of it, but he had to admit, watching them discover the truth was more satisfying than he had anticipated. Vanessa stepped forward, her heels leaving small divots in the grass. Up close, Derek could see the nervousness in her eyes, the way her fingers twisted the stem of her champagne glass. "Derek," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't believe it's really you." Derek met her gaze, searching for the cruelty he remembered, the sharp edges that had cut him so deeply in those hallowed halls. But all he saw was a woman who looked tired, who looked lost, who looked like she was carrying a weight she couldn't put down. "Hello, Vanessa." His voice was neutral, neither warm nor cold. "You look well." She let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You're being polite. I look like a woman who's been through a divorce and is questioning every choice she's ever made." The admission surprised him. This was not the Vanessa he remembered, the queen bee who never showed weakness, who wielded her beauty and her status like weapons. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, and meant it. Whatever she had done to him in the past, he didn't wish unhappiness on anyone. Vanessa shook her head, dismissing his sympathy. "Don't be. I probably deserved it." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. "Derek, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago." But before she could continue, Chad pushed his way between them. His face flushed with alcohol and wounded pride. All right, enough of the dramatic reunion," he said loudly, playing to the crowd. "So Derek made some money. Good for him. But let's not forget who he really is. A charity case. An orphan who got lucky with a scholarship." He turned to the gathered guests, arms spread wide. "Remember when he used to scrub the cafeteria floor for lunch money? Remember when he wore the same shoes for 3 years because he couldn't afford new ones?" Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked, falling back into old patterns of cruelty. Derek felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, the anger that had fueled him through so many dark nights. But he didn't let it show. He had learned long ago that the best revenge was living well and responding poorly. "I remember all of it, Chad," Derek said calmly. "I remember every name you called me, every time you shoved me into a locker, every lie you spread about me stealing from the donation box." He paused, letting his words settle over the crowd like a fine mist. "I remember the day you and your friends cornered me behind the gymnasium and told me I should drop out because I was embarrassing the school. I remember going back to the group home that night and crying into my pillow because I believed you. I believed I didn't belong." The garden had gone completely silent. Even Chad seemed frozen, unable to respond. Derek continued, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "But here's what you don't know, Chad. Here's what none of you know. Those moments, those awful, humiliating, soul-crushing moments, they didn't break me. They built me. Every time you knocked me down, I got back up. Every time you told me I was nothing, I worked twice as hard to become something." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, yellowed with age, but Derek handled it like a precious artifact. "This is the scholarship letter I received when I was 14 years old. I've kept it all these years as a reminder of where I started." He unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the words he had memorized long ago. "It says that I showed exceptional promise, that I had the potential to achieve great things if given the opportunity. For years, I thought the letter was wrong. I thought the admissions committee had made a mistake, that I didn't deserve to be at Westbrook, that all of you were right about me." He looked up, meeting the eyes of his former tormentors one by one. "But now I know the truth. The letter wasn't wrong. You were." A woman near the back of the crowd began to clap, then another, and another. Soon, applause rippled through the garden, growing stronger with each passing second. Derek saw tears streaming down the faces of some guests, former classmates who had perhaps carried their own secret shames, their own memories of cruelty witnessed or inflicted. He saw others looking at their shoes, unable to meet his gaze, and he saw Chad Henderson standing alone, stripped of his bravado, looking smaller than Derek had ever seen him. But Derek wasn't finished. He folded the letter and returned it to his pocket, then turned to address the crowd one final time. "I didn't come here tonight to show off my helicopter, or my suit, or my bank account. I came here because my daughter, the most important person in my world, told me that I've been running from this place for too long." His voice softened, becoming almost intimate despite the size of the audience. "She told me that facing your fears is the only way to truly overcome them, and she was right. Standing here, looking at all of you, I realize that I'm not afraid anymore. Not of this place, not of these memories, not of any of you." He turned to Chad, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Chad, I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you, because you've spent your whole life tearing others down to make yourself feel tall. But real height comes from lifting people up." Chad's face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like the scared little boy he must have been beneath all that cruelty. A boy desperate for approval, terrified of being seen as weak. "Derek, He trailed off, unable to find the words. Vanessa stepped forward again, her cheeks wet with tears. "Derek, please, let me say what I came here to say." Derek nodded, giving her the floor. She took a shaky breath, her hands trembling at her sides. "I was horrible to you. We all were, but I was the worst. I laughed when they called you names. I looked the other way when they hurt you. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that you should just toughen up." She paused, struggling to compose herself. "But the truth is, I was a coward. I was so afraid of losing my place in the social hierarchy that I sacrificed my humanity. I became someone I'm ashamed of." She looked at Derek, her eyes pleading for something. Forgiveness, understanding, absolution. "I've thought about you so many times over the years. I've wondered what happened to you, whether you were okay, whether you ever recovered from what we did. And every time I felt this weight on my chest, this guilt that I couldn't shake." Derek listened in silence, watching the walls Vanessa had built around herself crumble in real time. This was not the reunion he had imagined. He had expected gloating, satisfaction, perhaps even a confrontation. But not this. Not genuine remorse. Not tears. "I got divorced last year," Vanessa continued, her voice barely audible. "And when I was sitting alone in my empty house, I realized that I had spent my entire life caring about the wrong things. Status, money, what other people thought of me." She shook her head, a bitter smile crossing her lips. "I had everything and nothing at the same time, And I kept thinking about you, Derek, about how you had nothing and still found a way to become something. How you took all that pain and turned it into fuel. She reached out and touched his arm, a gesture so tentative it was almost imperceptible. I'm sorry. I know it's 15 years too late. I know I can't undo what I did. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. From the bottom of my heart. Derek looked at her hand on his arm, then at her tear-stained face. The anger he had carried for so long, the burning resentment that had driven him through late nights and early mornings, through failed deals and impossible odds, it began to dissolve, replaced by something he hadn't expected. Compassion. "Vanessa," he said gently, "I forgive you." The words seemed to physically lift a burden from her shoulders. She let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Chad stepped forward, his earlier bravado completely gone. He looked like a man facing a judge, awaiting a sentence he knew he deserved. "Derek, He stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. "I don't know how to say this. I've never been good at apologies. My father always said apologizing was a sign of weakness." He laughed bitterly. "My father said a lot of things that turned out to be wrong." He met Derek's eyes, and for the first time, Derek saw the person beneath the persona. A man who had been shaped by expectations he couldn't meet, by a legacy he couldn't live up to, by fears he couldn't face. "I was jealous of you," Chad admitted, his voice cracking. "You had nothing, but you had this fire, this determination. You worked harder than anyone I'd ever met, and no matter what we did to you, you achieved." He shook his head in wonder. "I hated you for it. I hated that you could be so strong when I felt so weak inside." Derek listened, feeling the last remnants of his anger slip away like water through open fingers. "You were just a kid," he said quietly. "We all were. Kids do stupid things, cruel things, because they don't know any better." Chad nodded, tears streaming down his face. "But I should have known better. And I'm sorry, Derek. I'm so sorry for everything." He extended his hand, a gesture of peace, of reconciliation. Derek looked at the hand, remembering all the times those same hands had shoved him, hit him, stolen from him. Then he reached out and shook it firmly. "Apology accepted." A collective exhale seemed to pass through the crowd. The tension that had gripped the garden dissipated, replaced by something warmer, something healing. People began to talk again, to move, to breathe. But the conversations were different now, quieter, more thoughtful, as if Derek's presence had forced them all to confront truths they had long avoided. Derek found himself surrounded by former classmates who wanted to shake his hand, to apologize, to ask about his journey. He answered their questions patiently, sharing stories of struggle and success, of failure and redemption. He spoke about Wesley, about Callahan Capital, about the deals that had made him wealthy and the values that had kept him grounded. And through it all, he kept thinking about Penny, about how right she had been to push him toward this moment. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift toward the parking lot, Vanessa approached Derek one final time. She had fixed her makeup, but her eyes still held the vulnerability of earlier. "Derek, I know this is probably inappropriate, but..." She hesitated, then pressed forward. "Would you like to get coffee sometime? Not as a date or anything. Just, I don't know. I feel like we have a lot to talk about. Or maybe I just want to understand how you did it. How you became who you are." Derek considered her offer. A year ago, even a month ago, he would have refused. But something had shifted tonight. Old wounds had been cleaned, old debts settled. Maybe it was time to see what could grow in their place. "Coffee sounds nice," he said. Vanessa smiled, and it was a different smile than the one he remembered from high school. softer, more genuine, touched with hope. "Thank you, Derek, for everything." She turned and walked toward the parking lot, her steps lighter than before. Derek watched her go, then pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. Penny answered on the second ring. "Dad? How was it? Did you show them who you are?" Derek laughed, the sound full and genuine. "I did, sweetheart. But more importantly, I showed myself." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" He thought about how to explain it. The apologies, the tears, the unexpected redemption. "I mean that I went there, carrying 15 years of anger and resentment, and I left with something better." Penny's voice was eager. "What?" Derek looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, at the helicopter waiting to take him home, at the world that had once seemed so hostile, but now felt full of possibility. "Forgiveness," he said softly. "I left with forgiveness." There was silence on the line, then Penny's voice came through, warm with pride. "That's the best thing you could have shown them, Dad. That's the best thing anyone can give." Derek smiled, his heart full. "I learned it from you, sweetheart. I learned it from you." He walked toward the helicopter, nodding goodbye to the few remaining guests, feeling lighter than he had in years. The pilot started the engine, and the blades began to spin, cutting through the night air with a familiar roar. As the helicopter lifted off, Derek looked down at the Westbrook Country Club growing smaller beneath him. The fairy lights twinkled like earthbound stars, the white tents glowed in the darkness, and somewhere down there, people were having conversations that might change the course of their lives. He thought about Chad, about Vanessa, about all the others who had witnessed his return. He thought about the scholarship letter still folded in his pocket, a reminder of where he started. And he thought about Penny, waiting at home with her fierce love and her unwavering belief in him. The city lights appeared on the horizon, a glittering tapestry of possibility. Derek leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel, really feel, the magnitude of what had happened tonight. He had come seeking closure and found something far more valuable. He had come expecting confrontation and discovered redemption. He had come as the scholarship orphan who scraped cafeteria floors for lunch money, and he was leaving as the man who had learned to forgive. The helicopter carried him through the night sky, toward home, toward his daughter, toward whatever came next. And for the first time in 15 years, Derek Callahan felt truly free. Not because of his wealth or his success or the look on Chad Henderson's face when he stepped off that helicopter, but because he had finally released the weight he'd been carrying since he was a scared 14-year-old boy, alone in a world that seemed determined to remind him he didn't belong. He belonged now, not because anyone gave him permission, but because he had claimed his place through years of hard work and determination. And more importantly, he had learned that belonging wasn't about money or status or the approval of people who had never deserved his respect in the first place. It was about knowing your own worth, about building a life that reflected your values, about loving and being loved by people who saw you for who you truly were. Penny had taught him that, and tonight, in the most unexpected way, so had the people who had once been his tormentors. The helicopter touched down on the private helipad near his building just as the moon rose over Manhattan. Derek thanked the pilot, stepped onto solid ground, and made his way to the elevator that would carry him home. When he opened the door to the penthouse, Penny was waiting in the living room, her pajamas on, her hair still damp from her bath. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist with the abandon of a child who has been waiting anxiously for her father's return. "You're home." Derek hugged her tight. breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of her small body against his. "I'm home," he confirmed, "and I have a lot to tell you." They settled onto the couch together, and Derek recounted the evening's events, the helicopter landing, the shocked faces, the confrontation with Chad, the unexpected apology from Vanessa. Penny listened with wide eyes, gasping at the dramatic moments, nodding solemnly at the serious ones. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had shared. "So you forgave them?" she asked finally. "Even after everything they did?" Derek nodded. "I did, because holding on to that anger was only hurting me. They had moved on with their lives, but I was still stuck in those hallways, still hearing those names, still feeling like that scared kid who didn't belong." He pulled her closer, resting his chin on top of her head. "You were right, Penny. Facing my fears was the only way to overcome them. And forgiving those people, it wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about setting myself free." Penny snuggled against him, her voice sleepy but content. "I'm proud of you, Dad." Derek felt tears prick at his eyes, tears of gratitude, of relief, of overwhelming love for this small person who had changed his life in ways he was still discovering. "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart, for being wise beyond your years, for pushing me when I needed it, for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling window. The skyline stretched before them like a promise, a testament to everything Derek had built and everything still to come. His phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen and saw Vanessa's name, along with a simple message. "Thank you again for tonight. It meant more than you know. Coffee next week?" Derek smiled and typed a reply. "I'd like that. Let me know when works for you." He set the phone aside and returned his attention to his daughter, who was drifting off to sleep against his shoulder. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the group home to Westbrook Academy, from humiliation to triumph, from anger to forgiveness. It was a story he would tell Penny in full someday, when she was old enough to understand all its complexities. But for now, the simple version was enough. He was a single father who had faced his demons and emerged stronger. He was a businessman who had built an empire from nothing. He was an orphan who had found a family in the child he was raising alone. And he was a man who had learned, at long last, that the measure of a person wasn't found in their bank account, or their past, or the opinions of others. It was found in their capacity for growth, for forgiveness, for love. The stars shone above Manhattan, indifferent and eternal. The city hummed with a million stories unfolding simultaneously. And in a penthouse overlooking it all, Derek Callahan held his sleeping daughter and knew, with absolute certainty, that he was exactly where he belonged.